We will start with a presentation from Minister's side. He's been made aware of your questions which were submitted ahead of this meeting. So the presentation will cover some of these topics, I guess, and after that we will open, let's say, Q&A session. I will partially cover those questions which maybe we will need a reiteration after Minister's presentation. And we obviously will watch out for what come in through the QA button option. That's more or less it on housekeeping. So it's once again great pleasure to welcome the Minister, and Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andžs. Hello, everyone. Thank you for this welcome and introduction. Indeed, myself and Andžs go way back, and we met, I think the first time was when we both served in senior civil service roles, and we have moved around quite a bit since then. But we do look increasingly like each other, and I guess that's something to do with time and, yeah, and shifting priorities. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I indeed have a slideshow prepared, which I would imagine will cover a substantial part of the questions that have been submitted beforehand. So if not, I'm sure and I trust that Andžs will raise the questions later on, and that we will also have a chance to communicate with each other bilaterally. Now, let me switch to presentation mode, and hopefully technology works. So the title is Improving the Health of Latvia's Health System. And indeed, COVID-19 has stretched our health system to the limit. But I would like to say that it is my firm belief that we have withstood the test. And let me try and elaborate on this thesis a little bit more. So first of all, in order to discuss anything else, we need to talk a bit about how we have tackled the COVID-19 challenge that fate and a global epidemiological situation has thrown at us. Now, indeed, if we look at our history, this is the 14-day cumulative and 7-day cumulative ratio. These are the most commonly used for international comparison and for tracking situation with new infections. So these are new unique infections, and it indeed looks like a I don't know, I guess a camel or something, and obviously the worst point that we reached was around New Year's Eve. In fact, the worst day we had was very early January, which coincided with the second day that I was in office. Now, since then, we've had this decline till about April, and then we have wavered since. Now, if we basically put these things into sort of sequence, then we now know with hindsight that whatever we had in the spring and had us really concerned, afraid even, was nothing compared to what came later, but we didn't know it then. And apparently the societal response and also relatively timely response by the local authorities, national authorities, allowed us to manage the initial phase quite well. So we now know. We might not have thought that then, but indeed we see that now. In the fall, when COVID-19 came back, and there are people who make simplified claims that we wasted the summer. I would disagree. We did not entirely waste the summer. The health sector, the education sector, a number of other sectors actually spend substantial time discussing various scenarios that might be necessary in the fall. But I have to admit that political class as such and the government in general, given what it is, a very diverse group of people with varied background and experience, with a mixture of five political groups. I'm not saying parties because it's more complex than that. 5 political groupings with very different opinions on most issues. But we are not alone. I mean, many governments in Europe and elsewhere made that same decision to have a gradual approach in the fall. So as the virus increasingly spread, we responded with gradual restrictions. The problem with that is that virus always had the head start. And that's an argument that's been made by many serious epidemiologists, also by people who have become fond of the subject since. And it's indeed true that we never had an initiative where we gave it up to the virus, and every time we responded, we gave more time for the virus to gain traction and then spread even further. So eventually we had to come to quite drastic measures, not quite as bad as some other countries. There are still things that we haven't done. We have not since still introduced let's say lockdowns, meaning staying at home scenarios, or continuous stay within your municipality sort of restrictions, which have been common elsewhere. We have only had a weekend curfew of sorts for a period of time in the beginning of this year and during the New Year's celebrations. So we did manage to break this growth, and it happened around the time I actually came to this office. So we saw a decrease for a prolonged period of time, decrease that was too slow for most people's taste, including mine. And I have to admit that I guess COVID exhaustion in our country has been very pertinent phenomena for quite some time now, which is obviously reflected in decisions by the political class and government, among others. So in that sense, we have been, our impatience and our lack of stamina in some ways has been part of the reason that our decrease has been slow and stopped, because we did make decisions to open up a number of aspects of life, some not sufficiently, like education, but in some others we probably went too far. There's been a lot of pressure from the interest groups, a lot of pressure from specific political organizations, and this status quo has been excessively difficult to maintain. In other words, we have arrived at the situation that since April we saw the stop of decrease, and the emerging trend of increasing new infections, which has stopped for the last few days. We were really concerned for the last couple of weeks when this growth trend was pronounced, but in the last 3-4 days we see a slight but tangible decrease over the numbers a week ago. So once again, it's really not the restrictions themselves or measures, non-pharmaceutical measures in the Euro speak. It's the people that stop the virus. It's the government, the people in the government that make decisions and create a particular narrative, a communication environment and messages. And it's the people on the ground, every single one of us, that make these things happen, and whether we learn to live with the measures and perhaps find ways around them in a sort of post-Soviet MO, which is probably part of the issue. But generally, in any given society, the status quo, the sort of the operating consensus that we achieve is unique, and it's not really possible to compare mechanically different steps, different measures that have been introduced in different countries. Yes, we can learn from each other. Yes, we can copy, and we do. But it is never simple to know in advance what actual effect those same measures will have, or the timing of those measures in any given society. So this is something that we need to take into account. So once again, initially we had this phase of relatively successful control, which we now see, seemingly structured and decisive, timely actions by the government, which was helped by the fact that that virus actually arrived here in sizable numbers a couple of weeks later than elsewhere in mainland Europe, which gave us some time to mobilize. The society was quite mobilized, and indeed the levels of the decrease in transportation use, etc., have not really been reached anymore since the spring last year, despite much lower actual level of infection. So then the fall, gradual restrictions were difficult. They became confusing, too nuanced for people to be able to follow those things up. People actually adapted their behavior before the new measures were introduced, and etc. So in the January-February period, although the measures worked, they worked less than we'd like. So the efficiency of measures increasingly diminished, the social activity began to increase, the political and business interests grew in force in terms of opposing this restrictive approach. So in a sense, we became stuck in being unable to open up because the infection levels were still quite high, unable to fulfill this three-colored traffic light principle, which we introduced in attempt to create a sort of more forward-looking system, more forward-looking policy and framework. We, in the end, it turned out, were unable to actually fulfill it ourselves because of this fatigue and impatience. So now we have arrived at this sort of plateau phase where we are in a race against time while we vaccinate to try and maintain numbers as low as low as we can. But what we really see is that the COVID has become the new normal, and nobody really, people are no longer, including the people in the parliament, are no longer scared of the figures in excess of 400 14-day ratio. So this is the sort of new normal, and we really do not see what's happening in the hospitals, while hospitals cry out and say that it's still very, very bad. Now, obviously, the only real way out is okay, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Now, we might be annoyed about how we have progressed, but really things can only be seen in a perspective and comparison. And here, if we compare those things that can be compared across countries, which is infection rates per million people in this case, we see that Latvia has actually fared relatively well, at least compared to our neighbors, our immediate neighbors. We have managed to avoid third wave so far, to speak of, fingers crossed. And our highest peaks have been substantially lower than those of our southern and northern neighbors. Now, compared to European Union average numbers, you see that we have had these, in a part of the time, we've had this strange sort of you know, mirror sort of counterintuitive relationship. When the figures improved in Latvia, they became worse in European Union, and vice versa. You can really see that since February. Now our trend is generally growing, which again opposite the European trend. Now, obviously, vaccination is the only way out. It's not a definitive way out. It's something that will take time, and will need to introduce revaccination plans, which we are working on, by the way. We are much more proactive this time around. But speaking of vaccination, I'm sure you know, we achieved a long desired objective last week. Officially, we have now been able to vaccinate 102,000 doses last week, which is by far the best week so far. We seem to be on track to repeat a similar number in this week. Our average vaccination ratio per 1,000 people is now above European average, so we are finally catching up. You know the history. We actually had a terrible deficit of vaccines due to two major reasons. First being the the choices we made in the fall with vaccination portfolio. So basically buying AstraZeneca and buying Janssen and some other vaccines fully, while not taking every opportunity to buy mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer-BioNTech or BioNTech-Pfizer, as German colleagues insist, and not buying Moderna fully. So that, plus the fact that AstraZeneca failed to deliver more than one, basically we only received 1/3 of AstraZeneca's that we counted on in the first quarter. This created a massive shortfall of deliveries vis-a-vis other member states in Europe, and we are only now catching up, given that there are massive Pfizer deliveries, including advanced deliveries that we gained from European Union as a result of prolonged and proactive negotiation. So we have built a system now. We have a vaccination rollout system in place. So maximum capacity is far from reached. We could do much more than 100,000 a week, technically. We have vaccinated almost 7% of grown-up population last week, but we could go up to more than 10%. We began vaccinating the 16-year-olds starting from the Monday this week, all of them. And since May the 3rd, vaccination's open for everyone. And this is an unusual choice to do it so early in the process, but it was dictated, among other things, by this long deficit period and the fact that when opportunity was there for the priority groups, due to issues with AstraZeneca, you know the history with all those reputation issues and concerns about these side effects. So essentially the priority groups were not that eager to utilize the full capacity of doses that we had at the time. So that led to a political decision, a government decision, to open up vaccination for everyone on May the 3rd. So the challenge for us, the vaccination organization, is to make sure that that seniors and other risk groups are continuously our top priority, and that's what we do. In terms of targets, and there was a question also sent in on this issue. So what you see here is essentially the green is the first dose, and light grayish blue is the fully vaccinated percentage and volume. We expect that by end of May, we will reach a 35.9, roughly 36% level of people vaccinated with at least one dose. But it's really important to point out that by middle of June, we would be in a position that at least 1/3 of Latvia's grown-up population would have received full protection of vaccines, having received both doses or completed the full course of vaccination, including Johnson & Johnson having one dose. Why is this important? Because that's the sort of moment where we believe we can safely introduce similar programs as in other countries that are more advanced with their vaccination targets, and safely introduce substantial, broad programs for vaccinated people to liberalize restrictions and essentially allow vaccinated people to come back to pretty much normal life, at least in areas where it is possible to control. So what we are planning to do, and actually already doing, so the implemented part is that people in well-vaccinated professional groups like medical staff and social care homes are already exempted from screening tests, and we have introduced last week no self-isolation requirement for close contacts or after returning from travel to EU, UK, and European Economic Area. And since yesterday, government decision, which was all proposed by Ministry of Health, ourselves, small groups up to 20 people, organized groups in workplace, in amateur arts or sports can go back to not wearing masks or not observing a social distance and actually function in a normal way. Now, Next steps are pending, in part, further government decisions and availability of the system of these digital green certificates or vaccination passports, technologically being available for national use. And we expect that to happen by end of May. And we have pledged that from June 15th, we will join fully the European platform of digital green certificates. So in this case, the question that was asked about UK vaccination passports and when we would accept those is a matter of essentially these UK passports being in sync with the European digital green certificate system rather than our national one, because we make our national system with the European digital green certificate system in mind, fully compatible. So, and in terms of time, there is, it's pretty much the same moment in time. So this would allow us to introduce broad services for the vaccinated, such as cinema, concert, and sports events, conferences, catering indoors, all sorts of services, etc. But going back one step, these domestic green certificates would allow us to relax restrictions on those remaining individual services which have not still been made available due to epidemiological risks, such as individual services in cosmetology and some other areas. Now, let me switch completely the gears and move to another theme, which is the priorities and budgeting. Very briefly, our budget in the health sector has been massively influenced by COVID-19. There are substantial investments in, but these are short-term, temporary, not recurring investments in COVID-19 management. We have invested huge amounts in the health sector to be able to cope, refitting hospitals, expanding their capacity, paying extra to the medical staff in various branches of health system, funding the vaccination drive, getting ready also for revaccination, etc. So these things are all part of our budget current situation. But in terms of policy in general, if we look at what's on our plate right now, we are still dealing with initial vaccination as discussed, but we are already getting ready for revaccination. We are considering the best international practice, talking to other countries. Thank you for organizing a meeting with the British specialists, and we talked to WHO, etc. About creating vaccine portfolio similar. We know that there will be this fat tail of COVID, the long COVID. One of the obvious effects is that up to 10% of people who had this disease will require rehabilitation programs. And this is something that we'll be dealing with for the rest of this year. There is a lot of catching up to do. There's a lot of treatment that has been postponed. There is oncological diseases. There's all the usual non-communicable diseases that we have a bad situation with in good times. So obviously, we will have a lot of catching up to do. So we know what our weaknesses are and we know what we need to do. So COVID-19 has exposed the historical issues with and failures in digitizing the healthcare system, and we have plans there. We know how we need to increase resilience of healthcare on all levels. Infrastructure we address. We know we work on the top of the apex, the university hospitals, but we also need to do a lot of change in accessible primary care and then make sure that our health system finally operates as an integrated, accessible, publicly funded system. Not least, focus on people in the health system, on the shortage of talent, on paying people appropriately, making this system as much as possible predictable, and create vision and perspective for people to know how these things will change going into the future. In terms of funding, last year and this year, we have seen increases in health funding because of COVID. And for the last few years, obviously, additional investment in the health sector has been huge, but sadly from a low base. So those massive increases have allowed us to improve the situation with salaries, and primarily in the health sector, COVID-19 has helped us with additional infrastructure funding. The EU funds come on top, also including the RRF, which is directly COVID related. But the main challenge we are facing is how to maintain funding increase to try and catch up with funding levels of healthcare compared to other OECD and European countries in post-COVID environment. Well, we know that fiscal space will be excessively tight, and political difficulty in discussing the budget allocation will be even more complicated than it has been in the last couple of years. And it's difficult to imagine how that could be more complicated, but it certainly will. So additional amounts are substantial. In 2020, we had 85 million additional COVID-related funding, and the earmark for this year is much, much more, 422. Not all of it will necessarily be used, but the numbers are substantial. Massive amounts in testing, massive amounts for vaccination. Not all of it will be related to this year. Substantial amount for overtime and compensation for additional work and risk in the healthcare for salaries, top-ups. But the problem with all of this is that these are one-off payments. These are one-off funds, and this will not be a base budget for next years. Now, I will probably not spend too much time on this, although funding is always an interesting part. But in terms of infrastructure, we have big plans, but we are not quite doing as well on people investment going forward. We lack commitment there. We have a tough discussion with the Prime Minister and Finance Ministry on making plans about future and salary increases, since this would increase the overall fiscal deficits potentially. So we can rely on investments that are, again, one-off investments from the EU funding, from RRF, etc. Substantial numbers here, including digital health. We have earmarked substantial funds for that purpose. Most of the rest is really hospital infrastructure, among other things, investing in ability to deal with future pandemics. One of the largest investment programs is the Riga Eastern Hospital, Rakus, which is the primary hospital for treating infectious diseases now and going forward. And they really needed that, but obviously there's a lot of other needs in the system. Less money in human resources development, but some substantial investments in improving human resources situation. But this need to be matched by regular investments from the state budget in salary increases. Now, few words on rebuilding the digital health system. Now, we have been working recently in two directions. First, we have worked closely with the World Health Organization, and thank you to the World Health Organization's local office and experts with developing the strategy. But on the other hand, we've been trying to build also practical steps and map out our next actions on making sure that this time round we make the digital health system work. Now, in terms of really, I don't really need to spend time on this. We know why digitization of health systems is needed. It creates new services. It makes existing services more accessible. It improves the quality potentially. It increases efficiency, transparency of how system operates, increases the data availability on making that enables us to use the resources more efficiently and actually create new services which never existed before. So what we are now trying to do is to make this next steps differently from the past in a number of ways. Well, first of all, we will use the ecosystem approach. We will no longer try to build something that includes everything and ticks all the boxes. We are not trying to build a government IT system that does everything. Rather, we need to take an ecosystem approach that integrates The private sector initiatives integrates the digital initiatives by various players in the system, such as large university hospitals and others. Our job is to make sure that there are the governing and the enabling factors in place, such as privacy regulations, standards, data exchange standards, that there are skills and capacity to coordinate and implement those parts of the system that only government can implement, such as the large registries, etc. So we will try to build, that's at the bottom of the page, the Digital Health Competence Center. And you might know that e-governance in this country has been switched in recent years to this approach of competence centers, that the system is hinging on several larger conglomerates of organizations, people, and skills in given areas. And we would like to build that in health as well, based on National Health Service, NVD, Nacionālais Veselības dienests. So the approach we'd like to take, differently from the previous phases of e-Veselība, the e-health system, which has largely not worked out the way we wanted it to be. It's cost a lot of money and it's still not functional. So we will try to involve users from day one. We will use transparent, open, public processes to develop, like hackathons, like boot camps, a number of other sort of startup-like approaches. We'll try to make the system open to a variety of solutions locally and abroad, large and small, so make this ecosystem approach work. But for that, we need to have a vision of the contracting party, rather than ask consultants to tell us what the system should look like. We actually have to have a vision of what it is that we like to create. And secondly, we need a capacity on the contracting parties side, the health, in the health ministry and National Health Service. So that's the proposal we will go forward with, and we invite you to participate in this. So yes, on the basis of the National Health Service, we'll try to develop a digital health competence center. For that, we need some support from the government. We need some funds for the talent. And ironically, it's the let's say, frequently mentioned Vaccination Bureau that has allowed us to have this approach, since we managed to hire several highly skilled individuals, including in IT, for the vaccination project. So these people can now help us with reshaping approach to the digital health ecosystem development in general. We have some funding already set aside for digital solutions. Some of that money has actually a timeline attached, which is pretty ambitious. So that's a challenge we need to deal with. At the same time, develop a broad vision, and at the same time implement specific steps. As an example, we've been lagging behind with oncology registry, and these things need to be done more or less in parallel while making the whole thing work together. So that's a non-linear, challenging task. So I'll stop here, colleagues. Thank you for your patience, and I'm open to questions that might come from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniels, for this very informative presentation. And yeah, I would, looking at the questions which have been submitted, and I think also that we can structure them in 3 big groups. One is the, let's say, situation with vaccination and potential opening of economy, and also opening international travel, and number 2 would be budget, and number 3 digitalization, as you already did in your presentation. And on the first theme, I think you covered very well the topic of introducing, let's say, some of the measures for fully vaccinated inhabitants. There still are questions that, for example, for school kids, it will take much longer for them to be fully vaccinated. So, and also the economy might not, let's say, the vaccination levels might not reach the desired kind of outcome, and then COVID might become a bit more like a permanent phenomenon. So that from that perspective, there were actually questions how is there thought about opening up and kind of co-living with COVID going forward, because we can't keep schools closed, and also the service sector, for particularly the tourism sector, needs solution regardless of vaccination. It would be nice to hear about that from you.
Sure. Well, it's a excessively complicated and nuanced subject, but I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. You know that we have spent the last 3 months at least working with various industries with varying success and various level of engagement, indeed working a lot on those safe protocols. Okay, so these will be useful in any case. Now, in order to introduce these, in many cases, we needed to get to a better situation with new infections. In other words, this 14-day indicator. And sadly, we have not managed to do that enough. We have managed to reduce the incidence rate enough to be able to make additional steps for opening up the society in general for everyone. What we can do, though, is to open up services and opportunities for vaccinated people. And by now we have vaccinated 25% of grown-ups at least once, almost 8% of both doses. And we're very behind other countries, but again, we're catching up. So that's why we have in a way shifted gears at the moment from discussion. The conversation has naturally shifted from discussion on reducing restrictions for everyone to actually providing opening up for vaccinated people, because that's the way out. As the quicker we vaccinate people, the more incentives we create for people to come and get their vaccine, because obviously we are concerned that this flow of people to the vaccination centers will start decreasing soon. There's every reason to believe that we might have issues with getting 70% of grown-ups to vaccination centers in the coming weeks and a couple of months. We badly want it, but we really need to motivate them already now. So once vaccination will start to reduce incidence rates, and that's inevitable, and we see in other countries that once 40% of grown-ups, US situation, elsewhere, around 40% of grown-ups have been vaccinated fully, that incidence rates falls, mortality falls. So that's when we can actually continue opening up the rest of sectors for everyone. Again, vaccination is key. These two things come into this interplay, and that's what I mean by saying that we are in a race against time. So speaking of children specifically, you know, from this Monday, we vaccinate the adolescents, 16, 17 years old. FDA has approved now Pfizer for use, BioNTech Pfizer for use for children from 12 to 16. We expect the European Medicines Agency to follow very soon, probably by end of month. So we will not hesitate. Once that's done, we will do that too. So we'll begin vaccinating younger children, the teenagers as well. Obviously, that will not help with this with school year, surely, but at least it gives us a reasonable hope that we can come back to more normality in the fall for the next school year. Now, we know that the COVID-19 will probably stay around in some shape or form going forward. Now, the immediate task is to complete vaccinating the reaching this this herd immunity level of 70%. Whether we get there, I hope we will, but we know that will not provide a full answer. Everybody has read, I don't know, New York Times, Washington Post on the topic. We know that it will not just take all the problems away. There will still be need for those safety protocols. There will still be people who are not vaccinated. There will still be risks. There will be new variants. And yes, we are looking forward to receiving improved, updated vaccines as soon as they arrive. So all of this is part of our thinking going forward. So yeah, let's stop here.
Thanks so much. A quick follow-up question. I also see what comes in the comment side. The question about opening non-essential travel. Would, let's say, the introduction of the digital green certificate would trigger that, or have there been any discussion?
Let us clarify. Non-essential travel is quite possible. It's just not recommended. And we have tried not to make it excessively easy either. In other words, safety has been our main concern. So people who ask, now, why would we still have the additional PCR test requirement when you come back to the country, although you had one before leaving the third country, for example? That's because of these new variants. I mean, we don't want the Indian variant here in Latvia. We do not want to see more of South African variant, which can bypass AstraZeneca vaccine. I, for one, have AstraZeneca vaccine. My mom does. We don't need that here. So in that sense, non-essential travel is possible, but we really need to be very careful about this. The world is not going to be a safe place for quite some time. So in that sense, speaking of non-Latvian EU tourists, I think a lot of that is really the ability, what we can do with hospitality sector, on which conditions can those services be rendered. The travel itself is possible. The question is what awaits tourists here when they arrive, which services are available in HoReCa sector, for example. So vaccination passports will certainly be a huge part of the answer, huge part. It's a game changer. So in that sense, I hope you understand that the Ministry of Health fully switches gears right now. We switch from this sort of keep restrictions in place, hold against everybody else, sort of all the business interests, just hold on mentality to, okay, how can we comprehensively enough provide regulation for opened up services for vaccinated people, because that's safe, as opposed to opening things for everyone. Once vaccination takes full effect, we can do that for everybody else as well, on some conditions. Just an example. For example, we can open up for vaccinated people services in controlled areas, like, I don't know, closed restaurant space. What we can't do, we would still have to ask, like in America, we would still have to ask vaccinated people to wear masks in public transport, because there's no easy way of separating the flows of vaccinated and non-vaccinated peoples in public incidental spaces where people mix and change, and it's impossible to track and control. So safety will remain a major concern for us.
Excellent. Maybe before moving on to more, let's say, see also questions falling into category of more general policy and future perspectives, but rounding up on vaccination and opening of economy, there were one question very specific. Let's say, if there is, how to put it, oversupply of vaccines, vaccines which are not utilized in Latvia. What's the plan regarding this? Okay. And secondly, is there a plan to eventually give a choice of vaccine to people so they can pick which one they go for?
Well, first of all, we have ordered more than 6 million vaccines. But some of those are vaccines that have not been approved yet, so it's a theoretical possibility. But there's more than enough of the 4 kinds of vaccines that are registered. So the current mainstay is BioNTech, Pfizer. This might change as some other vaccines arrive. For the moment, there is no surplus. In fact, we are holding on to the 50,000 AstraZenecas to keep them for the second doses. We are no longer officially injecting first doses of AstraZeneca. Now, if there is a surplus, and when there is, it's rather inevitable that we will, that there will be some surplus between first big wave of vaccinations and revaccination, which seems inevitable. We are already ordering Pfizer's for the next years with the European Commission. There is this new, contract emerging for the 2022-23. We will be part of that. So already thinking about those things, but there will be surplus, and obviously we will either donate to the European partnership countries or COVAX or resell, we'll see. In fact, I wrote to the ministers of the neighboring countries today and asking them if they have any it seems they have some surplus of AstraZeneca. So I'd like to make sure that we can get some of that here if we run short of AstraZeneca's for second doses, because AstraZeneca is not really delivering at the moment. And we're not quite sure whether we'll get enough in time in the middle of June. So we're dealing with all those things. We're still not in the surplus mode. What was the second part of your question? Sorry, I forgot that.
The question was whether people will be given an option to choose whether to go to AstraZeneca. And I see in comment section someone asked whether the Sputnik will be an option as well eventually.
Yes, all the usual questions. Now, first of all, the vaccine choice is in fact a reality. It's just not advertised massively and not promoted officially. Let me explain. For young people that only can have Pfizer at the moment, 16 to 17 years of age, we tell them you can rely that if you register for your vaccine at the large center, they'll have Pfizer. If you check in with anybody else, ask first if they have it, right? So that's choice. Now, second, obviously, we do not at the moment give choice for someone who has received first dose of AstraZeneca and I don't want it anymore, I don't want the second one. That's not the kind of situation we would offer something else instead. We have not made a scientifically based official decision to allow mixing of vaccines, not yet. We might, but not yet. The studies are still out there. And the countries that have done so, including large countries like Germany and others, do it at their own risk. And we are very risk averse at this point in time. I hope you understand. So we'll deal on these situations on a case-by-case basis. If there's a medical need, we'll certainly do something. Now, otherwise, I mean, we tell people that Riga Central Market and Daugavpils centers will have Janssen this weekend. We say that. I mean, we try to give some warning, but what we are not doing, just to draw a line, we are not telling people when they register on Vaccine LV, the booking system, we do not tell them which vaccine they are picking. We do not give that choice, all right? So, and there are good reasons because of the deficit in the past and some moral issues, etc. We don't know at which point which vaccine will have abundance of and shortage of something else. So we'll try to manage that process and manage expectations in this regard. Speaking of Peter Donald's question, if you are registered in Latvia, if you are working here, if you are in diplomatic corps or pay taxes, whatever, I mean, you might qualify for vaccination in Latvia like everybody else. Okay, so please check that and you can register either by phone 8989, they speak English, or if you have local authentication through the internet bank or something, then you can actually do it on Vaccine LV. All right. If not quite sure, please via organizers come to us. On Victor's question, yeah, well, I wouldn't be able to provide a short answer on demographic issues. The Ministry of Health can certainly take care of healthy years that people live in and make sure that the mothers and newborns are doing well. But this is a whole government effort and re-immigration issue and general economic development issue. But which is most pertinent to Ministry of Health is the human resources aspect. We compete for our medical professionals with all the other countries in the EU and European Economic Area, among other things, Norway and UK. So that's true. I mean, we need to fight for providing competitive environment in the workplace and salaries to our medical people. That's the most valuable asset that we have. So in this regard, Ministry of Health is very aware of the need to improve working conditions and competitiveness of our offering to our medical professionals in every field.
In a way, but continuing on this question, I see also Dita asked whether there is risk that, let's say, COVID has kidnapped the attention span of the government and Ministry of Health from other critical areas for, let's say, health of society, be it cardiovascular, be it oncology. Maybe you can outline a bit of strategy for coming years, which is not exactly COVID related, but the other key areas you want to address.
Well, I guess Dita knows the answer. Knowing Dita, I know that she has an idea. Now, obviously, we were all kidnapped by COVID in some respect, and the capacity of the health system has been massively preoccupied with everything else. And there's every reason to believe that there is a unmet demand in terms of oncology, cardiovascular disease, and other non-communicable diseases. We see that. I mean, if we look at the capacity rates of occupancy rates of the hospitals, we see increasingly in the last weeks that this caseload that comes in the way of the hospitals is not just COVID related. I mean, the ICUs, intensive care units, are overwhelmed with patients or with other nature of diseases. So it's a reality. Now, what to do about it is we'll need to balance those two things: the effects of COVID directly, meaning all the rehabilitation and the chronic diseases that will be created by COVID itself, as well as this backlog of unmet, untreated diseases in other medical areas. And what we can do about it is use the additional capacity that has been put in the hospitals, including new equipment, including new intensive care unit spaces. It's done. I mean, some of that has actually, COVID has in that sense become an opportunity by increasing the capacity of the hospital system, by engaging the local hospitals, municipal hospitals more, and also re-equipping those in part. So the capacity of health system has actually improved. And there's a number of other reforms that are in the pipeline with the remuneration system, with this sort of leveling of hospitals and others that will actually help improve the delivery of healthcare services. But in the end, it's a budget issue. And last year, you know, we had a massive increase in the health budget, but it was all for salaries. It was nothing else. I mean, no other increases for medicines or for new medical technologies, for treatments, none. So that's what we need to balance. I mean, it's an imperative to continue investing in a predictable manner in the human resources, including the residency programs. But I mean, to attract new talent also to the regions, not just the big university hospitals in Riga. But at the same time, we need to balance those investments in salaries also with investments in other areas. Digitization being one, okay, there is some money for investment, but in other areas as well, such as availability of medicine, of new medical technologies, etc., etc., etc. Oncology, palliative care, and a number of other areas.
Thank you. You keep emphasizing the human resources dimension. There still were questions about, let's say, the hardware part. You said the plan for investment in hospitals for coming years, and you highlighted Ausbildungslimit, if I understand. So is there any other major investment plans in terms of infrastructure, let's say, term 5-7 years?
Sure. I didn't spend much time discussing those. We had some information on slides, but there are clearly the majority of investment is focused on the 3 university hospitals, all 3 of them, the eastern one, the Stradinch, and the Children's Hospital. But also there are investments that are directed at large regional hospitals, which as my predecessor was planning that they might actually, we might consider making them state hospitals. And this is something to be still considered. And this will be the backbone of the hospital system in the country. And the COVID will make us reconsider to some extent the role of local hospitals, the third and the second and first level hospitals, because almost all of them have been engaged in treating COVID patients. This has made us rethink the role of the hospital network. Yes, specialization will need to take place as planned. The cooperation of the various hospitals in the system, depending on their service level, will need to be continued. The actual clarification of those service levels is a must. And yet the role of this diverse sort of hospital network has been, our understanding of it has been affected by COVID.
Thank you. And maybe moving to the third topic you also covered in your presentation, which is digitalization. And you outlined this ecosystem approach, basically going into more dynamic mode in developing this ecosystem and digital health. One of the questions which we see also here is, in this ecosystem, do you see opportunity to take over some of the solutions which has been already around and developed and used in other countries? And I think members here can offer many solutions. The same, the digital green passport, I think it's already in place in Denmark. Could you elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm. The simple answer is yes. We are very much open to utilizing all experience there is. As you might imagine, I guess my camera is getting blurry, so I'll do something about that. Is it better now? Yeah, it helps on and off. Good. Now let me explain on the example of this vaccination system, or VIVAT. Yes, a vaccination network. What we did, we basically did a micro model of what we want to do with the overall large digital health ecosystem project. Specification that was created in a week by a group of volunteers from the Latvian IT industry for free. We do not expect that to happen for free or by volunteers in this instance, but it certainly is a good example that a contracting party should take upon itself to engage professionals that create a blueprint of what needs to be done, a vision, okay? Instead of, subcontracting, creating the task to somebody else, which was the initial plan, and sorry for consulting agencies whose procurement I actually paused. I'm not saying that no work will come your way, but we're not ready yet. We're not ready to say what we want, and we need to do that. Now, second step was that there was this open call for proposals, and there were also international companies that offered their services, one from America, one from Germany. You might imagine which ones. And we evaluated every pro and con and the costs and specifics and the timeline, and we opted for the Latvian consortium, and they delivered. That's good news. I mean, they learned something in the process. I mean, the Latvian IT industry actually has some amends to make with regards to the history of the e-health system 1 and 2. Now, going forward, we are planning to exactly the same, basically have a specification in place of high-level architecture vision of what we are trying to build, and then put it out for open call for proposals for expressions of interest by a variety of players, including international companies. So again, we'll be able to make educated choices about which parts we procure in which ways. Now, I imagine that we are going to do something like this, that there are these key components in the system, the central architecture, the system of main national registries, health registries, that should be, ready-made, tried and tested system that works, that's proven, where we shouldn't really experiment with that central part. And then there is a whole lot of peripherals, various specialized systems, interfaces, applications that connect on the basis of preset interoperability standards, data management standards, data protection standards, which are mandatory for all participants. Otherwise, it's an API. It's an open connection, a plug and play with the central part of the system, which is the core. Okay, the rest of the ecosystem is basically something that creates the user experience and, different system. Startups can compete with larger companies, but we would like to encourage diversity here. I do not believe, honestly, I do not believe in comprehensive solutions out of the box that respond to every need and is somehow miraculously capable of functioning in the heterogeneous Latvian IT environment. I just don't see it happening. So it will, in any case, going to be a combination of something. It's a combination of established players and startups, combination of existing solutions and adapted solutions. Something that government controls and something that government only provides an API for. That's it.
There was actually one also very specific question talking about existing solutions, that a number of hospitals run their own systems, and currently this information exchange is not, to our understanding or to understanding of the author of the question, is not really happening. So that the ecosystem approach would kind of address this issue as well, that there has been parallel developments in many years and not necessarily talking to each other.
It totally should. I mean, as far as I know, the large hospitals are at the moment engaged in making sense of what they have. Okay, and so basically consultants have been hired and trying to take stock of what it is that they have and how it operates or doesn't. And it's good that the boards of the hospitals will find answers to those questions. Now, the next step is making sure that when the hospitals spend the earmarked funds from the RRF on developing these comprehensive hospital information systems, that they do not only make sense for the hospital itself, but they actually talk to each other, and it actually feeds into this emerging digital health ecosystem that we are trying to build as the central component. So it must be designed on a preset standards, data interoperability standards, which we as the government must, as the Ministry of Health, must create. So yes, it should be part of this. In fact, this actual process of large hospitals developing these new systems is the primary trigger for us to speed up this, designing the overall architecture, because we want to be able to integrate what hospitals will be doing right now. So it doesn't matter in what sequence initiatives come, as long as they make sense in the end.
Okay, and maybe to wrap up this topic, you mentioned the Digital Health Competence Center, and there is a question from Peter: can foreign companies be part of this initiative? Maybe you can outline how you see how the center will be designed and who going to participate on what and what are rules.
Well, for the moment, it's as I said, we will start with designing sort of this high-level architecture and specification with the users. So low-level and high-level, top-down and bottom-up, combined. And so once we have that rough specification in place, we can start organizing hackathons and calls for proposals where also international companies can participate. But we're not there yet. For the moment, we'll probably hire some specialists that will help us design what we need to design as the contracting party first. So not yet. I mean, the time will come for all sorts of players to get engaged. Now, I guess I maybe should take some more questions, which I can respond quickly. Somebody asked about Sputnik before, and why I haven't bought Sputnik before. Well, I think, ladies and gentlemen, that you've seen that what happens when a separate country engages in direct relationship with Russia and heroically buys Sputnik from them, as the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic have learned the hard way. Now, Latvia will consider buying Sputnik when it's registered with EMA. We have no regulatory capacity to make that decision on our own. It would be nearly impossible politically and practically to rely on a third-party registration process. In other words, accept Russia's own registration procedures and just blindly take it in. This is not something we have been prepared to do. We have left no stone unturned in terms of getting additional doses from joint procurement mechanism in the EU. I managed to obtain extra 167,000 Modernas early on, and jointly with the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and our staffs, we managed to get a substantial amount of advanced Pfizer doses, which allows us now to speed the process up. So we have been trying to solve the problem by other means. But when EMA registers other vaccines, if we really need it, we'll consider buying.
And Edith, regarding back to vaccines, asks whether the day off might be offered, same as the analogy with blood donation.
Yes. We're very much considering it. One of the things two reasons that hold us back. One is that it would actually incentivize people to overstate the side effects and, basically increase this sort of bad press about vaccines. But I don't think that's a critical one. And the other is just practical issues. We are not quite sure what financial burden that will be. We need to discuss that with Ministry of Finance, but it's certainly on our drawing board. It's one of the things that we consider as part of encouragement measures for vaccination program.
And there has been one clarification regarding Sputnik, that the question was maybe not so much about using it here in Latvia, but allowing travelers particularly from Russia to enter.
That's an entirely different issue. Now, for the moment, we have made the decision to accept, for the purposes of vaccination, proof of vaccination from vaccines that have been recognized by the WHO or the EMA, and no other decision has been made yet. So in that sense, I think it was Sinopharm vaccines that was accepted by the WHO, not yet EMA, but otherwise we would accept as the basis for providing those, let's say, I forgot, sorry, I'm tired. Those
improvements,
benefits, those benefits for vaccinated people would only, for the time being, be available for people who are vaccinated with those EMA and WHO recognized vaccines. But I guess everything is work in progress with regard to vaccination. So once EMA registers Sputnik, that shouldn't be a problem any longer. But for the time being, people vaccinated in Russia would not be entitled to the same benefits that that others with other recognized vaccines would have.
So there are more questions, because people are putting questions both in comment and question side. It's a bit challenging to navigate, but there are more questions coming back to funding levels and basically multiple years of underfunding of health sector and need to increase funding for specific themes state funding for reconstruction of breast for women after breast cancer and so on. But I guess you already outlined the trouble or the hardship government has in designing the budgets for coming years. I don't know if you have more to add to that.
Sorry, can you reiterate this? I was trying to read both chats during the same time, so I guess.
I also have the same difficulty. So basically, the question, there was a specific question. I think there was also several questions in what have been sent to you about oncology.
Yes.
And post-oncology treatment, and that is underfunded area for many years. Can you give any hope in that direction?
Well, this is an issue which is directly related to the budget. there's very few things that you can do in the area of oncology which wouldn't have a price tag attached. There are some things, some reorganizations, some improvements in the way the oncology center is working, and that's being considered. There are some things that can be done with no money or less money, sort of culture change things with screening, with introduction screening programs, or making sure the existing screening programs work on the primary care level with the general practitioners, that the people are actually involved and invited and engaged, etc., to utilize those programs that are in place. But otherwise, most of the things in oncology require additional funds. And I've been notified by my team, my staff, that this emerging oncology plan, in other words, the action plan for the coming years to cover every aspect of oncological treatment, be it early diagnostic, availability of modern care, etc., all of this, including the digital registry, etc., that would relatively be easy, but it's sort of what holds us back with this oncology registry is really a shortage of staff, people that can run simultaneously complicated IT projects. We have limited availability of people like that, and they're very busy running the digital green certificate system at the moment. Okay, they just finished the vaccination system. We are full on DGC now, but we'll get there. But otherwise, this oncology plan apparently will have a price tag of roughly 100 million euro. And I will abstain, since we have a representative of the Fiscal Council here, from discussing the chances of us getting more or less of that amount of money, given that we need to have at least a mirroring amount of investment in the salaries in the health sector, continuous investment over the years. That's, I guess, in the 5-year plan to reach the target salary level, we need around 70 million euro each year for 5 years in a row, with plus indexation going onwards. So it's a challenging budgetary issue. So sorry to oversimplify this. I know there are things that need to be done and can be done besides the budgeting, but it is very much a budget issue.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And I think that with this, since you kind of already hinted that this discussion might become difficult, given my second role in Fiscal Discipline Council, I suggest we will wrap up today's discussion. And also see Ilse has switched on her camera, so I guess she has some concluding remarks to say. Unless, yeah, maybe Ilse, back to you, and you distribute the remaining minutes we have as you prefer. Thank you.
Yes, so on behalf of the 7 organizing chambers of commerce and close to 100 participants that joined today, I wanted to thank the Minister of Health, Daniel Pavļuts, for finding the time to talk to us today and to take so many questions. Not all of them could be addressed right away, but we will summarize them and bring it to the Minister's office if you see them. Possibility to respond to them in other communication channels. Also, many thanks to Andžs for moderating and navigating the 2 communication channels, the chat and the Q&A. The topic is very hot, and even though we had to reschedule the meeting twice, it was really worth waiting. And Daniel, thank you so much for taking our questions. It was our privilege. So with this, I'll conclude the meeting, and may you succeed in your efforts in achieving the goals. Thank you.
Thank you. What was this? Stay safe, stay sane, yeah, and healthy. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.